Okay, so yesterday we were looking for a makar that for avodim or goyim who were boil a woman, they disqualify her from eating truma, even though there's no tvisas kedushin. When there's tvisas kedushin, we can learn it from uvas koyin kisiya isar. He betrumas hakadosh lo yochal. But someone who doesn't have tvisas kedushin, such as an eved and a goy that's baal bas Yisrael, how do we know that they disqualify her from eating truma? So the Gemara says we're learning it out of the pasuk that says uvas koyin kisiya almana ugrusha uvezera ela. Then she can come back and she can eat from the truma of her father's household. So the Gemara says that it says Dafka, who could come back to her father's household? Bas koyin kisi almanu grusha. How does a woman become an almanu grusha? If one is married to somebody, if there's a havaya married to somebody, and that person dies or divorces her, she becomes almanu grusha. But if she's married to a person, quote unquote married, to a person who doesn't have tefisas kedushin in her, well, then she doesn't become an almana or a grusha because she was never married to that person. So therefore, she will not have the heter of going back to eat the trumas beis aviyah if it's zera. That's how the Gemara darshans it. However, the Gemara wants to know who said that that's the way to darshan it. All it's saying is that if she's not an almana or grusha, meaning if she's married to a man who does not have tefisas kedushin in her, such as an eved or a guy, then whatever it says in the pasuk doesn't apply to her. So how do you know that the kula of the fact that she can go back to eat truma if she does not have children? How do you know that's what the pasuk is trying to tell us? Will not apply to her, and therefore she cannot eat truma once she's nevelas to an eved and eved kachavim. Maybe there's something else that the Torah is trying to project on this woman, and maybe it's a kula that it tries to project on this woman. Because what does the pasuk say? If a woman becomes an almana of a grusha and she doesn't have children, then she can go back to eat truma. But if she did have children, then she cannot go back to eat truma. Well, maybe that's what we're focusing on. Which woman, if she does have children, cannot go back to her father's household to eat truma? That's a woman who there's tefisas kedushin on her. But if there's no tefisas kedushin, maybe she can go back to eat truma from her father's household, even if she does have a zera, even if she does have a child. When do we say a child disqualifies her from going back to eat from truma of her father's household? That's if she was married to somebody who had tefisas kedushin. But if she was married to somebody who didn't have tefisas kedushin, like a never and a guy, maybe then she can go back to eat truma even though she has a child. That's what the Gemara is kasha here. Frank, the Gemara is kasha. How do you know that you're darshaning it the right way? Maybe the Gemara is saying the ema mishiesh le'almanus ugerushin ba then ki les lezera ka'achla but ki is lezera lo'achla. But misha ein le'almanus v'gerushin ba. But if it was an eved or eved kachavim that was born this woman who doesn't give her a status of an almana, who doesn't give her a status of a gerusha, maybe she can go back to eat mitruma savia afal gav de isle zera namitech. So who said the pasuk is telling you a chumrah that applies to someone who's nevelas from an eved and eved kachavim? Maybe the Torah is teaching us a kula to the woman who is nevelas from somebody who doesn't have a tefisas kedushin. Zok Gemara, let's think about this for a second. We could say that the pasuk is teaching us a chumrah, or we could say the pasuk is teaching us a chumrah. Now we know that since it said ubas koyin sheti almana grusha, and it didn't have to say ubas koyin, because like the Gemara said a moment ago, kule ubas yiserahu, it's all extra, and therefore it teaches us that not only does this halacha apply to a woman with tefisas kedushin, it also applies to a union without tefisas kedushin. So let's think about it. Im kain, if the Torah is just trying to project a kula on a woman who doesn't have tefisas kedushin, ribuye levia v'Yisrael eslamali. From the ribuy of ubas, we learned that this does not only apply to a bas kohen who is eating truma from his father's house, from her father's household. It also applies to a bas Yisrael and the Bas Levi who was eating truma currently because she was once upon a time married to a kohen. Well, if that's the case, why do we need the pasuk to tell you that this also applies to Israelis and Leviah? Fakert, we know Israelis and Leviah is less chomer than the Bas Kohen. So if she's less chomer than the Bas Kohen, and the Torah tells us this halacha by a Bas Kohen, we would for sure know it by Leviah and Israelis. So it must be that since the Torah is putting in a special riboy with Bas Kohen to tell you that this not only applies to a Bas Kohen, but it also applies to Leviah and Israelis, there must be a chumrah that the Torah is trying to project, and the chumrah is that if she's nevelas to someone who does not have kedushas, who does not have a kedushin, then even a Leviah and even Israelis will become permanently puzzled from eating truma. Fact to Gemara, this whole approach to learning this psukim of havaya, meaning kedushin, and therefore we're saying that it doesn't apply to chayv krisos. I'm sorry, it doesn't only apply to chayv krisos. It also applies to chayv lavin, because the Torah is trying to tell you, v'chisia, a woman who is in a relation of even a chayv lavin, will also become disqualified from eating truma. That's very good if you don't like Rabbi Kiva. But with the Rabbi Kiva, the Amar ain't kedushin types in b'chayv lavin. According to Rabbi Kiva, who ain't types in b'chayv lavin, how is he going to learn chat of v'chisia le'izar? He can't learn it like we're learning it. That I mean in the case of Tfisis Kedushin, because according to Rabbi Kiva, there is never Tfisis Kedushin, because even a Chai Ve'Lav has no Tfisis Kedushin. So he has to learn the pasuk V'chisiya, not referring to a Kedushin. He must referring to the word V'chisiya as literally a bia. V'chisiya, u'baskoin kisiya le'izar. Baskoin who has a bia with the izar will become possible. So Zok the Gemara, Rabbi Kiva, Kedushin Kedushin Chai Ve'Lav, Ma kisiya le'izar. Kisi boil, it has to be daf kamina bia, because there is no havaya at all. There is no tfisis kedushin by any chayve lavin almana of Jerusalem. So then, why do we need the pasuk to add an almana grusha? The Rashi almana grusha lashabina avid kachavim ve'eved lamali. Why do we need this special chiddush according to Rabbi Kiva from v'chisiya le'izar? You would know it already, because it's talking about any bia. It's not only talking about someone with tzitzis kedushin. It's talking about whether there's tzitzis kedushin or not, because there's never tzitzis kedushin. It just means any woman who has a bia le'izar, he betrumas hakadosh from. So why do we need a special pasuk now of vatskarin kisi almana grusha? We already know all of the women, all types of women, whether they have tzitzis kedushin, whether they don't have tzitzis kedushin, if they develop for someone that's also to them, they can no longer eat truma. So what is the pasuk of almana grusha telling us? So the Gemara, very, very simple. Almana lahachmirallah and grusha lahaklallah. And what does this mean? A tricha. The yashmin almana who the chilas lazera achla. It's almana lahaklallah to tell us that an almana, you would think that an almana, even though you might think that an almana, she doesn't have children. Maybe she still couldn't. Why? Because I would think almana who the chilas lazera achla. You should the chazal the kahuna. Oh, I'm sorry. So why did it say gerusha? Why did it say almana? So I would think it's like, why did it say gerusha? Because if it would always say if a woman became an almana, she can eat kachim. I'm sorry. If an almana becomes the Torah only said that if a woman who's a bas kohen who married somebody and became an almana, she's allowed to eat kachim if she goes back to her parents' household. She's allowed to eat kachim. If she doesn't have children, I would think daf an almana the chilas lazera achla. So you have a bas kohen who married Yisrael. She became an almana. Only she could go back to eat kachim if she doesn't have children. Why? Because as an almana, this woman could still marry a kohen. So since she could still marry a kohen, maybe that's why she goes back to her father's household and she's allowed to continue to eat truma as she was before she got married. Aval gerusha. But you might think a woman is a gerusha, once she becomes gerusha, which means she was married to a man, and this man divorced her. She was married to a man, this man divorced her. So she can no longer marry a kohen. So you might think she cannot go back to her father's household eat truma on the count of her father's household. The less lo zera, even though she didn't have children, lo yochla. So the Torah had to tell you specifically that a grusha, a woman that was a bas kohen who was eating truma, she went and got married to a Yisrael. Now she can no longer eat truma. If her husband divorces her, even though she can't marry a kohen anymore, but she could still go back to her father's household and eat truma. V'yesh meaning grusha, but if the Torah only told us grusha, I would have thought grusha who dechi isla zera lo yachla. I would think that a woman who has children, so a woman who was a bas kohen, who married a kohen, and she had children from this Yisrael, and then her husband dies, the Torah says that woman cannot go back to her father's household and eat truma because she already has children from Israel. So I would think that this disqualification of having children with a ish Yisrael disqualifies her from eating truma is only if she's a grusha. So it's grusha who dechiyis lazer lo yachla. You know why? Because a grusha would not be able to marry a kohen anymore. But what if she was only an almana from this ish Yisrael? The chajah lakuna, she could still marry a kohen. Maybe ema avagav the isla zera nami techel. Maybe even though she has children, but once she's an almana from this Yisrael, maybe she can still go back to her father's household. And eat truma. Shricha, the Torah tells you almana. It tells you almana that even an almana, if she has children, she cannot go back to eat. And the Torah says even a grusha, if she doesn't have children, she can go back to eat. So even an almana, if she has children, cannot go back to eat. So it's a chumrah by almana. An almana, even if she's only an almana, but if she has children, she cannot go back to eat truma. And the grusha that doesn't have children, even though she cannot marry a kohen, she could still go back to eat truma from her father's household. So let me just stop here for a second. So all women that got divorced or became almana doesn't make a difference. If they have children, they can no longer eat truma, but if they don't have children, they could eat truma. And the chiddush is, if she has children, she cannot eat truma, even though she's only an almana. And if she doesn't have children, she can still eat truma, even though she's a grusha, and she couldn't marry a kohen. An almana without children and the grusha without children, both of them may eat truma. They may go back to their father's household and eat truma. And whether or not you're an almana or a grusha, if you have children, you cannot go back to eat truma from your father's household. So that's how Rabbi Akiva would learn pshat in the pasuk, because Rabbi Akiva also has to understand what the psukim are telling you. Zok Gemara weiter. The Ema affect the Gemara nivel lepasala af machzer grushasai. We learned on Daf Mem Daled that somebody who is machzer grushasai mishanisas, that woman is still allowed to eat truma. That's what we learned. A person who is machzer grushasai mishanisas could still eat truma. But Lamaisa, if it was machzer grushasai mishanisas, there's allowed. So why is it that we say she's allowed to eat truma? Zok the Gemara is zar amar rachmana. Davka to the Vaskoin Kisiyah is zar only if she becomes married or novellas according to Rabbi Akiva to an ish zar. Only then do you say that she may not eat truma. Misha zar etzla meikara. Only someone who was never allowed to marry this woman in the first place, like a halal, a mamzer. Only those people will answer her from eating truma. Lafuka Lafuki, this husband who she divorced and married again, the loy zar etzla meikaru. She was originally allowed to marry him, and therefore, if he took her back illegally, he would not passel her from eating truma. Frank Timur, if that's the case, ihachi, once you come up with this new twist, that unless he was forever usher to her from day one, he does not passel her from eating truma. Chalal, the lav zar. Let me just see the Bach. The Bach add some words over here. Chalal, the lav zaru, a halal who's not a zor mekar. Ihachi, the Gemara, halal, the lav zaru mekar loy livsa. Zokt Rashi. What does that mean? Halal, the lav zar etzla who loy zizzle. The halal mutter afilu b'kehet. A halal is allowed to marry a kehet. there's no isser for a chalal to marry a kehenis. So since there's no isser for a chalal to marry a kehenis, why do we say that if she's nevelas to a chalal, she may no longer eat truma? Zok to Gemara, Amakra, there's a separate pasuk that says lo yichalel zarei be'am. It says in the pasuk someone shouldn't be mechalel his zera. Makish zarei loy. We compare his children to him himself. Mahu paisel, just like a halal paisels, avzari nami paisel. So what is he mahu paisel? If a kohen marries a woman who is usher to him, he pasels that woman. So for instance, a kohen who marries a grusha, he pasels that woman. That grusha will no longer be able to touch him, and she will no longer be able to marry a kohen. Avzari nami paisel. So too the children born out of such an illegal union. So if a kohen marries a gerusha, the child born from that union is called a chalal. So even though a chalal is allowed to marry a kohenes, nevertheless he will passel her from eating truma, because we learned it from Yachal Zari Bama, Makazari Loy, Mahu Poshel, just like he will disqualify the woman who he has beer with from being able to eat truma, Av Zari Nami, so to his children, meaning the chalal born from this illegal union, Poshel will passel a woman from being able to eat truma. Frek the Gemara, the Ema Mishas Havaya. Maybe that only happens when there is a kedushin. Zakrashi, the Ema Midavkarach Mana Baloshin Kisiya. Maybe since the Torah didn't use the word bia, the Torah said Kisiya Isar. We learn Mishas Havaya, meaning Ikidish Pasal as Isha Psulay Lamis Vafilu Meis Kilubala. We learned that what if a kohen hedyot makes a kedushin on a grusha? So we say she's temporarily possible from eating truma. But if he divorces her, or if he dies before he makes the nesuin, then she goes back to her father's household because she didn't have a beer yet. But practically more, why? Since we're learning Kisi Elisar is referring to kedushin, not according to Rebbe Kiva, the Ema Mishas Havaya. Maybe as soon as the kedushin is done, even before a bia, maybe that should passel a woman permanently, and we know that that's not the case. Until it's a bia, she's not passel permanently. We compare it to the issur of a kohen gadol marrying almana. Ma kohen gadol b'almana b'bia, just like a kohen gadol b'almana will not passel almana until there's a bia. Afha nami b'bia. So too all of these are b'bia. Where do you know that by a kohen gadol he doesn't passel almana unless he actually did a bia? So Rashi tells us on the very first wide line, when is there a chilul? When there's zara involved. When there's zara, meaning when there's a bia, that's when there's a chilul, that's when the almana becomes possible to eat truma. We learned in a Bal Yevamtai that Nisarmelo and Nisgashu, in fact, that if they became an almana from Erishin before a bia was done, the woman does not become disqualified from eating truma. So Zok to Gemara, we learn it. Dumya de kohen gadol be'almana. Ma kohen gadol be'almana. Let me just. I think I skipped some lines. Ve'em mishas havai is dumya de kohen gadol. Be'almana. Ma kohen gadol be'almana b'via. Just like kohen gadol be'almana does not pass permanently until there's a bia. Afaynami b'via. Frek the Gemara ve'ema adika havai ubia. Maybe you need kedushin and bia in order to pass a woman. So Gemara, no. Once again, dumya de kohen gadol be'almana. Ma kohen gadol be'almana b'bia lechuda. A bia alone without kedushin will pass her. Hainami b'bia lechuda. So therefore, it's the bia that creates the permanent soul in the woman from eating truma. If she's merely mikudeshes to a man that's also to her, that would not permanently disqualify her from eating truma. That would only temporarily disqualify her from eating truma. And if she had a get or her husband died before nisuin, she would go back to be able to eat truma. Now let's analyze the last two shittas of the brisa that we really didn't know what they meant yesterday. Now we're going to explain them. Rabbi Yosy Omer, Kol shezarei pasol, anyone who his children will be pasol, then he pasels that woman from eating truma. The Kol she'ein zarei pasol, but someone whose children will not be pasol, ein pasol, he will not pasel the woman who is boil from being able to eat truma. What does that mean? Ma'ika bein Tanakama Rabbi Yossi. Where is the Tanakama arguing with Rabbi Yossi? It sounds like there are certain women who, or there are certain men that after boil a woman, according to Rabbi Yossi, they'll passel the woman, but according to the Tanakama, they'll passel the woman. But according to Rabbi Yossi, it sounds like they won't passel the woman. Who are these people? We know that it says by Mitri, Dar Shlishi Yave Lahem Bakal. By Nadaimi it says Dar Shlishi Yave Lahem Bakal. So that means a second generation Mitri, if he is boil a woman, although he's not allowed to marry that woman, his children are allowed to marry the woman. You know why? Because his children are a third generation. And it says Dar Shlishi Yave Lahem Bakal. So what if a Mitri who's in the second generation is boil a woman? Will he passel her from eating truma? So according to Rabbi Yossi, who holds kol shazari pasel paisel, only a man whose children are pasel will be able to passel a woman who is boil, a Mitri of Dar Sheni, since his children wouldn't cause a problem because his children are already the third generation who are allowed to marry Eden. Therefore, he himself will not passel a woman from being able to eat truma. Where do you know this twist? Ushneim lo lamdu el mikoyin gadol. Sadi Tanakama, who answers such a woman, and Sai Rabbi Yossi, who holds a woman who is novellas to a Mitri, second generation, will not become pasul. They learn it from Kohen Gadol Balmona. Tanakama Sover, the Tanakama understands the comparison to Almona as follows. Ma Kohen Gadol Balmona, so B'yasi Ba'averu pasul. Kohen Gadol Balmona, what are its symptoms? It's a Bia Asura. And therefore, the woman who gets this Bia becomes pasul from eating truma. Afainami pasul. A Mitri in his second generation may not be boil of As Yisrael. And therefore, if he's boiler, she will be Asher Ti Truma. Rabbi Yossi says no. The Kohen Gadol, the comparison to a Kohen Gadol is slightly different. Ma Kohen Gadol shezarei pasul upasul, just like a Kohen Gadol who has Bia with an almana, the children of this union will become chalalim, they'll become pasul. And therefore, the almana who is boil, the mother of these children, also is pasul to eat truma. Afkol, so too, what type of bias create a psul on the woman, on the novellas? The truma is only kol shazari pasul. That's only if the children will be pasul. But if a mitri from the second generation is boil a woman, the child born is mutter lavay bakal. So therefore, she herself does not become pasul from eating truma. So therefore, Afkol Shazari Pasul Pasul, Lafuke Mitri Sheni, the second generation Mitri, the Ein Zari Pasul, the children from this union, will not be Pasul. Therefore, the woman, the mother of these children, the novellas, will not become disqualified from eating truma. Then we had the third chita in the Mishnah of Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, who said, Kol Shata Noisa Bitoy Ata Noisa Almanusa. If you're allowed to marry the daughter, you're allowed to marry his almana. Correct, Gemara, what exactly is Reb Shimon ben Gamliel trying to teach us? What exclusion, which woman is he saying whose novellas may still eat truma? Ma'ika ben Reb Yossi, the Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. Amarullah, I'll tell you what it is. It's ger amoni u'mayavi ika benayu. What if an amoni is born a woman? Does he passel her from being able to eat truma? If she was allowed to eat truma up until that point, or a ger mayavi, would he passel her from eating truma? Zok to Gemara, according to Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, it would not passel her. You know why? Because this same ger, his sister or his daughter, would be allowed to be married to a Jew. That was Boaz's Kiddush. Amoni v'lo amonis, mayavi v'lo mayavis. So since the psul of an amoni marrying a Jewish woman only applies to a male amoni or a male mayavi, but not to a female, that psul is not strong enough to permanently passel a woman from eating truma. Ushneim lo yamdu ela mikayin gadol b'almana. If Yossi over ma kayin gadol b'almana shezari passel u'paisel, what is the unique thing that we learn from a kayin gadol b'almana? That the children become a halal, and therefore the woman, the mother of the children, also becomes permanently passel from eating truma. Afkol shezari passel paisel, which means an amoni, his children, his male children at least, are still also to Klal Yisrael. So therefore, his bia will make the woman usher in truma. But Reb Shimon Gamliel Savar, we learned something else from Kohen Gadol. Ma Kohen Gadol Balmana, Shakol Zarei Pasuk. A Kohen Gadol Balmana, it doesn't make a difference if there's a male child or if there's a female child, neither of them will be able to eat truma. Upaisel. And they also wouldn't be able to marry Kohanim. Upaisel, therefore he passes this woman, this Almana, who is boiled permanently from eating truma. Af Shakol Zarei Pasuk. So too, somebody who all of his children will be possible, both his male offspring and his female offspring will be possible to kahuna. Only those who possible, the woman herself would become possible. Then calls are possible. Not all of the children will be possible. His female children are mutter to marry Klal Yisrael. Therefore, such a bia will not ask for somebody in Truma. Can you see what we're saying?
Can I ask you something as an aside? If we make the drosha that an Amoini and an Moavi are only the males of that nation, then it would follow that that Mitzri and the other ones are also the males. Is that not correct?
That's not correct.
Why is that? Why should that not be correct?
Because that's the halacha. The halacha of Amoni B'Lamonis, I mean Avi is only applied to those two nations. But a Mitzri and a Daimi, even a female may not marry into Klal Yisrael until the third generation.
Because there's a reason why the Moav and Ammon lay over Klal Hashem, and that's because the men they didn't bring bread and water.
Right.
So women aren't those who are responsible to bring bread and water. They're
the
not.
People who are guilty are the people who was incumbent upon them to do it, and they didn't do what they should have. Women, right. It was never expected of them to do that.
Right.
So the reasoning. So you mean Simeon and the Mitzrim, both the Mitzrim and the Mitzris were both cruel to the Bnei Yisrael, I guess, in Mitzrayim? They both played an equal portion? Because otherwise, why would Shlomo HaMelech be censored when he married Bas Paroi? That's where I was going. But you
because she was still the first two generations.
Right. So I thought that Mitzri was just like Amoini, but you're telling me right off the bat, no, I had nothing to continue. Okay.
Okay, good. So let's start off on the next mission.
Sorry.
So we learned if a kohen, I'm sorry, not a kohen. If someone who's apostle, I'm sorry, I'm making a mistake. A regular Yisrael who is ma'anis a woman, a regular Yisrael who is mafata a woman, or a shaita who made bia on a woman, who married a woman and made bia, whose kedushin is not a kedushin. So basically, what it's saying is a standard znus of a pnuya in a pnuya and a panui, that does not parcel a woman from eating truma. So loy poistelin v'loy machil. So, for instance, let's say there's a bas kohen and she does nus. She's not married. She's a pnuya and she does nus with a Yisrael. That will not parcel her from eating truma. On the flip side, if a bas Yisrael, a pnuya, does nus with a kohen, it doesn't enable her to eat truma. But if the person who she did znus with was not royal love Israel, she did znus with a mamzer, then it would pass her from truma. Then arei ilupois. Ketza. Let's give an example. Zokt Rashi, Zokt Bachamin, Harei Yisrael, and this is going to be repeated several times throughout the sugi. You'll have this, and there'll be a bach there, and it's telling us sticking the word Harei. Ketza, Harei Yisrael, Shabbat Baskayin, a Yisrael, a Panui, Shabbat Baskayin, a Panuya, Taychal B'Truma. Even though she did znus, she can still eat truma. And Tosha says something very, very important. Tosha says over here, 4 lines before the bottom of this last Tosha. Ba'filu Rebbe Lazar, Damar Panuya Abala Panuya, Shalola Shemishas Asa Zaina. Even though Rebbe Lazar said that a regular znus between a Panu and Panuya does make a woman into a Zaina, it still wouldn't pass her from Truma, even though she gets the status of a Zaina, and she's no longer allowed to marry a Kohen, she's still mutter and truma, dein zale isar. So that Tosfos is chiddush. That this halacha is not only if you hold the pani abal pnuya is not kosnos, even if you hold it is kosnos, like Rebbe Eliezer, who we don't pass on like anyway, even so, it will not pass her from eating truma. Zogt Gemara, but what if it got more complicated? What if it was Ibra? What if she did znus with a Yisrael and she became pregnant? So there, loy soichel b'truma. That in fact will disqualify her from eating truma. And Rashi reminds us, we learned that yesterday. The Mishnah told us that once she becomes pregnant, she's no longer kinureh. When she goes back to her father's household, she's no longer like she used to be because she's now pregnant. Therefore, she may no longer eat truma. Nechtach ha'omer b'me'eh, my body, my choice. What if she had an abortion? Then toicha. So then she is kinureh. She can go back to eat truma in her father's household. So here's another one of those configurations. Harei kohen, shabal bas Yisrael, a kohen that was baal bas Yisrael, loy soichel b'truma. She may not eat truma. Ibra, what if she became pregnant from this biasnus? Still loy soichel, because we said dafka yilid beisai toichel boy. This is merely a pregnancy. Yolda, what if a woman with did znus of bas Yisrael did znus with the kohen? She got pregnant and she had the baby. Now toichel she can eat. You know why she can eat? Because she now has a child from a kohen. So it says yilid beisai toichel b'lachmai yochel b'lachmai, and we learned it's machil. Once she has a child from a kohen, even if it's out of wedlock, she's still going to be able to eat truma on behalf of that child. Nimtze koicha shal ben gadol mekoicha ab. You see, the koich of the child got her the ability to eat truma, but the fact that she was nevelas to the father who was a kohen, that was unable to give her this chus to eat truma. So you see, the child in a certain way has a more power to be Michael, the mother with truma, than the husband who was boiler. In this case, it wasn't a husband. Or even if it was a husband. So Eved Poisel, Mishum Bia, an Eved will passel a woman if he's boiler, like we learned earlier. An Eved who's born a woman passels her from eating truma, and we said because it says Kisi Almana Grusha, right? Dafka is somebody who is Tfisis Kedushin, who could make her into a Almana, who could make her into a Grusha, to exclude an Eved, whose Bia will passel her from eating truma, but the Enya Paisel Mishum Zera. But the fact that she has a child from an Eved, it wouldn't passel her. Now the Mishnah, we're in a long Mishnah here, now the Mishnah is going to explain. Ketzad. Bas Yisrael LeKoyin. If a Bas Yisrael married a Koyin, or Bas Koyin Yisrael. So there's two separate cases here we're talking about, and we'll have to explain them one by one. So Bas Yisrael LeKoyin and Bas Koyin Yisrael. The Yolda Menubet. So a Bas Yisrael LeKoyin had a child, that will right away allow this Bas Yisrael to eat truma, or a Bas Koyin Yisrael was disqualified from eating truma because she married a Yisrael. The Yolda Menubet, and she had a child. So now the Bas Yisrael could eat truma because she has a child, and the Bas Koyin can no longer eat truma because she has a child. And then this son wasn't such a good son. And the Ben went and shacked up with the shifra. V'nechvash is not such an edler term. Rashi says v'nechvash means a nitchak. He literally stepped the shiksa. Nitchak the nidbak halel. That's what mechvash means. So it's a not bakovidik term for a not bakovidik union. V'nechvash ala shifra b'yolda himenu ben. And now there's a grandchild born to this woman. So this woman who either married a Yisrael or this woman who either married a Kohen, she had a son who shacked up with a Shivcha, and now there's a child. Hareza Evet. So meaning her anicle is an Evet, because her anicle is the son of a Shivcha. So let's think of how the chips fall. Haisha aim of a Bas Yisrael. In the case of a Bas Yisrael Kohen. So you had the Bas Yisrael Kohen. When she married the Kohen, she became eligible to eat Truma. She had a child. The Kohen died. Now she can continue eating Truma on behalf of her child. Now her child went and had a son, an Eved, because he was Ba on a Shivcha. And now the son dies. So the only person of her descendants that remain alive are this son or this grandson who's an Eved. So the halacha is, Loi soichel b'truma, she can't eat truma. Why can't she eat truma? Because she was married to a Yisrael. She was a Baskoin who married a Yisrael and became disqualified from eating truma, and she still has a surviving enical. I'm sorry, I'm making a mistake. Bas Yisrael l'koyin l'sechel b'truma. She was married to a koyin, which gave her the rights to eat truma. She lost her son, but she still has a grandson. Zok the Mishnah, this grandson will not be allowed to be Michael over truma. You know why? Because this grandson is not hers. This grandson has the yichus of an Eved, and the yichus of an Eved is not considered Zara. It's considered an Eved. It's not considered the Zara of her son. Therefore, it's not considered her grandson. Therefore, even though this is still technically a DNA descendant of her Kohen husband, nevertheless, this descendant will not be Michael or Betruma because it's not called the Zera of her child, it's a Shivcha. But on the other side, it works for her. Bas Kohen Yisrael. What if she was a Bas Kohen who married a Yisrael and she had this Einikel, who's an Evet, that would not pass her from eating Truma. She'll still be considered Vizera Einla, and she can go back to her father's household and eat Truma again. Because even though she does have a surviving grandchild, we don't consider it her grandchild because it's an Evet. Therefore, Toichel B'Truma. Zok to Gemara, let's look at a different twist. A mamzer poisel l'machal. Sometimes a mamzer will make a woman be allowed to eat, and sometimes a mamzer will disqualify a woman from eating truma. Now, although an evet, like we just illustrated, is not considered her zera, and therefore it will not be considered zera whether to pass her from eating truma if it was the zera of a Yisrael, or to allow her to eat truma if it was a zera of a kohen. It won't work because it's not considered zera. With a mamzer, which is considered a zera, does have an impact. So this is a fascinating case. Ketzad, Bas Yisrael l'kohen, ubas kohen l'Yisrael. In either case, V'yaldei menu bas, she had a daughter, V'alcha bas, the Benizas le'evet, and this bas married an evet, oy lo'evet t'chavim, V'yaldei menu ben. What is the anical of such a marriage? A Bas Yisrael that married an evet or a goy, it's a mamzer. Her is a mamzer. So now you have a grandmother who's lost her children, who lost her husband. She's only remaining with this grandson who's a mamzer. So let's think about it. If this almana was a Bas Yisrael who married a kohen, she has an anical. The anical is a mamzer, but it's still an anical, and it's still an anical that came from her union with the kohen. So therefore, toichel b'truma. So now this grandmother is able to eat truma because of her grandchild who's a mamzer. On the flip side, Bas Kohen Yisrael, if she was originally Bas Kohen and married a Yisrael, and therefore lost her right to eat truma because she was married to a Yisrael, but now her husband died and her child died, but she has a grandchild who's a mamzer, lo yisaychel b'truma, she cannot eat truma because she has an anical from a Yisrael. How about a Kohen Gadol? This is a fascinating story. Kohen Gadol, pa'amim shu poisel. A woman could have an anical as a Kohen Gadol, and that Kohen Gadol will stop her from eating truma. Ketzad, Bas Kohen Yisrael, a Bas Kohen married a Yisrael, so she lost her rights to eat truma. The old menu bas, and she had a daughter. So now, even though her husband the Yisrael died, since she has a daughter, she could no longer eat truma. When this is the kohen, then her daughter went and married a kohen. The old menu bas, she had a son who was a kohen, and then she died. So now this woman lost her husband who was the Yisrael, and she lost her daughter who was a kohen because her daughter married a kohen, but she has a surviving grandson who's a kohen. This grandson of hers could even become a kohen gadol. What if he was appointed as a kohen gadol? If his mother's alive, his mother will be able to eat truma because her son is a kohen. But the grandmother, who was married to Israel, who was a kohen, is married to Israel, if she has any offspring from that marriage, in this case her grandson, the kohen gadol, is an offspring of her marriage with the Yisrael, she will not be able to eat truma. So what a paradoxical situation we have over here. We have a case where a mamzer will allow a woman to eat truma, and a kohen gadol will disqualify a woman from eating truma. Zoy say meres loy kivni kohen gadol shu pashleim min truma. oh, I'm not so proud of my grandson, even though he's a Kohen Gadol, but he disqualified me from eating truma. So it's like the story where someone says, wow, your grandson's a Kohen Gadol. She says, that's nothing. My other grandchild was a mamzer, because the mamzer was able to be Michael or truma, but the Kohen Gadol couldn't. Now, of course, this couldn't happen with one woman. One woman couldn't be mutter and usher to eat truma, but a woman who had a grandchild who was a mamzer, but it was a grandchild that came from her marriage to a kohen, that mamzer will still enable her to eat truma. But a woman who started off as a bas kohen and became disqualified from eating truma because she married a Yisrael, even though the Yisrael died, she has an enikel who's a kohen gadol. That kohen gadol still makes her usher to eat truma because it's an offspring of her marriage to a Yisrael. Okay, let's hop around a couple more lines of Gemara. Zog to Gemara. Tanina laha the Tana Rabban. This we have a brisa that supports our brisa. The Tana Rabban. Shoyte v'katan shenasu nashim umesu. A shoyte or a katan who married a woman and died. Their marriage is really not a good marriage. Nishasayim paturas ben achalitu min. Their women are put in chalitza and yibum because we don't consider it a marriage. Ketzad. Harei Yisrael. Once again, we have the configuration where the Bach changes it to Harei Yisrael Shabbat al Baskay. A Yisrael married a Baskay. Taichal b'truma. She's allowed to eat truma. So he didn't marry her. I apologize. She was just ball. It was a bias nose. So it doesn't disqualify her from eating truma. Ibra. What if she became pregnant? Now loy cycle because she can no longer eat. Zog to Gemara. Even the Ibra loy taichel. If you're telling me that when she becomes pregnant she can't eat truma, well, if she's even nevelas to a Yisrael, she should also not be able to eat truma. Because how do you know she's not pregnant? She didn't take a pregnancy test. So even if she becomes nevelas to a Yisrael, let's be chosh that she's pregnant and let's stop her from eating truma. Miloy Tnan, didn't we learn in a case where we weren't sure two sisters got married to two brothers and there was a mix-up? It wasn't necessarily two sisters, but multiple women got married to multiple men, and we didn't know who was married to who. No, yeah, it was sisters who were married to brothers. We didn't know who was married to who. So each woman, it might be his wife, it might be Eishes Acher. So the halacha is Mafrishin Oishon Gimel Chadashim. You make them wait 3 months before they could marry anybody. Why? Because if they became pregnant from the first bia, those children would be mamzerim, and we want to be able to separate those children that are mamzerim from the children that they would have later that would not be mamzerim. So Shema Mubar saying. So we're worried maybe they became pregnant. So if that's the case here too, how can we let a woman eat truma when she had bia? Maybe she's pregnant. Maybe we should have to stop her from eating truma the moment she had bia, just in case she became pregnant. For yichus, to make sure we know who's a mamzer and who's not, we were very careful. So there we said she shouldn't have any more bia at all, so we shouldn't have mixed up. But the truma for truma, we're not choshish that she's pregnant, and therefore we'll let her continue to eat truma until we know she's pregnant. In fact, Gemara, that's not true. Of course, we're concerned not allowing her to eat truma just in case she's pregnant, because by the time we learned. What if someone said, if someone was a kohen and he gave his wife, who was Yisraelis, a get, and he said, I want this get to be chal an hour before I die. Since we have no idea when he's going to die, asur lechal b'truma miyad. She could never eat truma. Why? Because we're afraid he'll die, and then the truma that she ate was illegal because she was a Yisraelis at the time. So you see, we're chayshish for things. So how could we allow her to eat truma if she had bia from a Yisrael? Maybe she's pregnant. When a woman was married and she thought that she was having a bia with her husband, there she wants to get pregnant. So she lies in a position to retain the zera to create the highest likelihood of a pregnancy. But biznus like chashishu, we learned earlier in the Gemara that when a woman does a bia snus, as soon as she does the bia, she's going to try to push the zera out of her body. She's going to be in a position where the zera will leak out. She'll do everything that she could to minimize the chance of her becoming pregnant. And since we're talking over here about a bas kohen who had znus with the Yisrael, we assume that she did the znus in such a way where the likelihood of a pregnancy is low, and that's why we let her eat truma. We let her continue to eat truma until we know for sure she's pregnant. fact, are you telling me that by Nisuin they were chayshes? I'll show you otherwise. But Tanya, Baskoin shenishes Yisrael. A Baskoin who married Yisrael, umeis, and then the kohen died. So she's tamei because she had bia. So Tavela, she can toivel right away. Voicheles betruma, and she'll be able to eat truma la'erev at night. In other words, once she's tar from her bia. So the problem is, how could you say she's Tavelas voicheles betruma? I'm sorry, it's a bas kohen shenishes Yisrael, because she was allowed to eat truma. She married a Yisrael, so the Yisrael disqualified her from eating truma. Then the Yisrael died, so we assume she's not pregnant, and she can toivel and she can eat right away at night. So you see from here that even by Nisuin, we're not choshid that she became pregnant because we're allowing her to eat truma right away. What it means is we only allow her to eat up until 40 days. You know why? If she didn't become pregnant, then she's allowed to continue to eat truma because she's a bas kohen. But v'ima abra, even if she became pregnant, until the zera, until the fetus is 40 days old, we consider it water. We don't even consider it pregnancy. So even if she became pregnant right away, the first 40 days of her pregnancy does not yet disqualify her from eating truma. Amar le Abaye, Zokt Abaye. So that's why right away our Brisa says that if she was nevelas but she's not muberes, she could eat truma, because even if she was muberes for the first 40 days, that's not considered anything. And since it's not considered anything, she could still eat truma. Amar le Abaye, Ihachi Ema Seifa. Look at the Seifa of the Mishnah. Hooker Erbera b'me'era. If we find out eventually that she's pregnant, it turns out that all the truma she had eaten up until this point was illegal. According to you, the first 40 days, even if she is pregnant, she would be allowed to eat truma, because that's not called anything. It's mayabama. Zaktimar, you're right. My mukokelas adar boyim. What it means is, if she ate truma 6 months after the bia with her husband, and she found out that she was pregnant, so any achilas truma she made after the 40-day point, that would be a problem of having eaten truma when she was pregnant. But any truma that she ate during the first 40 days of her pregnancy, that wouldn't be a problem, because we don't consider that anything. We don't consider the first 40 days of her pregnancy as being pregnant, and therefore she would still be allowed to eat truma. Okay, it's 7:59. We will stop here. Itmar habala resources.